You're listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud. Welcome back to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, January 3rd, and I'm very happy to be joined once again by fellow South Stands contributor Paige Van Horn from Denver, PBH. How's it going, my friend?
I'm good, buddy. I'm ready to take my public flogging like a man here. Sure Sloaner's been crafting metaphors of my demise for the last 48 hours, so I can't wait to get into it.
All right, well, we will get you in front of the firing squad here momentarily. We are also joined by fellow South Stands contributor Chad Plummer from Cleveland. CP, what's the word from the 216?
All good here in the 216, just still floating above ground, man, from Friday night.
All right, I love it.
That's where I'm at.
Okay. Our man on the ground in New Canaan, Tim Gallagher, is also back with us today. Tim, how are you, my friend?
Cheers, boys. All good here.
Excellent. Finally, special contributor Matt Sloan from Brooklyn, back with us again today. Sloaner, good to be with you. How's 2021 treating you so far, buddy?
So far, so good. I had some Rugelach, made some fresh coffee, and I was able to touch my toes this morning. So good day so far.
All right. So on Friday night, just about 36 hours ago in the Sugar Bowl, number 3, Ohio State would storm back from an early 14-7 first quarter deficit to take a 21-14 second quarter lead over number 2, Clemson. With 6 minutes and 12 seconds to play before the half, the Buckeyes were on the move again, facing a 3rd and 13 from the Clemson 30. Justin Fields was flushed from the pocket and made a mad dash for the first down marker at the Clemson 17-yard line and was met violently by Clemson middle linebacker James Skalski, who speared Fields in the ribs with the crown of his helmet 1 yard short of the first down marker. Fields lay writhing in pain at the Clemson 18-yard line, and Buckeye Nation held its collective breath for what seemed like an hour. It was only the second quarter, but the Buckeyes had Clemson on the ropes. We could all sense the outcome for Ohio State would be very different from the 2019 Fiesta Bowl unless Fields was unable to get up from that vicious hit by Skalski. At that moment, Paige, what were you thinking?
You just explained it. I mean, you're holding your breath that he's got to get up.
Yep.
To that point, I was remarkably calm, but
Okay.
That went out the window when he was down on the field.
Tim, how about you? What were you thinking at that moment?
I was thinking that there's absolutely no way that he's going to play the rest of the game. And I started going through my head trying to think, okay, CJ Stroud or Jack Miller, like who's going to come in? How's this going to work? And we've seen so little of them this year that, the downward spiral of we're kicking their ass right now, and now this is about to go the other way hard started happening big time.
Oh, God, I was right there with you guys. I felt exactly the same way. But as fate would have it, Skalski would be ejected for targeting, and Fields, who was clearly in a lot of pain, we could see that, would have to leave the game, but only briefly, and would return one play later to throw a 9-yard touchdown to Chris Olave to put the Buckeyes up 28-14. It was the biggest flex in the 7-year history of the college football playoff and one of the greatest fuck you moments in Ohio State football history. And in my opinion, that was the ball game. Now, Fields would lead the Buckeyes on another scoring drive right before the half. And the Buckeyes took a very comfortable 35-14 lead into the locker room and were never seriously threatened after that. The final score, Ohio State 49, Clemson 28. The Buckeyes advanced to the college football playoff championship game against number 1 Alabama in Miami on January 11th. Now, Justin Fields, what can you say? Finished the night 22 of 28 for 385 yards and a Sugar Bowl record, 6 passing touchdowns. Running back Trey Sermon's improbable late-season surge continued. Sermon finished with 193 yards rushing on 31 carries and a touchdown. And junior receiver Chris Olave redeemed himself and then some from the mistake he made in last year's Fiesta Bowl that resulted in that horrible game-ending interception. Olave torched the Clemson secondary for 132 yards receiving on 6 receptions and 2 touchdowns. On the other side of the ball, the Ohio State defense was very effective in a bend-but-don't-break approach to Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, and the Clemson offense. Now, Lawrence finished with 400 yards passing, but on 48 attempts against a Buckeye secondary that was mostly successful in limiting those big throws down the field that I think that we were all afraid of. And despite the absences of defensive ends Zach Harrison and Tyler Friday, the Ohio State defensive line harassed Lawrence most of the night, sacking him twice, forcing him into 2 fumbles and an interception. Perhaps even more importantly, the Buckeye defense completely shut down Lawrence as a runner, holding him to -8 yards rushing on 10 carries. And the front seven bottled up Travis Etienne, holding him to only 96 yards from scrimmage on 14 touches. Etienne was really never able to get anything going either on the ground or as a receiver. That was pretty remarkable. Finally, Clemson's leading receiver, Amari Rodgers, who we thought had a major matchup advantage operating out of the slot, was held to 54 yards receiving. Pretty awesome performance by the defense. All right, fellas, to get our roundtable started, I like to go around the horn to get a high-level takeaway or two from this performance by the Buckeyes on Friday night. Matt Sloan, I want to start with you.
Well, I was harping on the coaching and on a previous podcast, and what I saw across the board was a superiorly mentally focused team.
Yeah.
And I think, we talk about this all the time, is that you got to learn from your failures. And I think the biggest step, like last year's team had far more talent in my mind, but this team was hardened, which with less of an ego and more of a focus. They had the balance of strut and kind of strategy kind of balanced out right, both coaching staff wise. And I think getting the team ready. So when they didn't let off the gas with these guys, and they did that last year to a degree from coaching on down. So I think the preparation really came through on the field. These guys had no let up. They were going to hang 50 if they could. They didn't stop. They made sure that they kept attacking the ball on both sides. And I think that was the key. That's just that kind of like, we're not going to let up until we're going to hear that final whistle when those triple zeros come up. And that to me was the biggest thing that came through on the field.
Very nice. Very nice. Chad, how about you? Give me one high level takeaway that you have from this performance.
I know you guys were all ragging on Day and all that, but Day showed he's one of the best college football coaches in America right now. And there's a reason for that. That was one of the most prepared teams that I can ever remember seeing. It was just, these guys were laser focused. They were ready to go. They had a plan. They executed it. They brought in, they spread the offense, and the boys on both sides of the balls, man, they just dug in the trenches and we kicked their ass. It was unbelievable.
I totally agree with
that.
It's
like Ryan, that's my point would be Ryan Day cemented himself as one of the best coaches in college football.
Paige, how about you?
I don't know that anybody was ragging on Ryan Day. I think we just said
was ragging on him.
Yes,
it was maybe not ragging, but there was a lot of Ryan Day.
Rightfully so.
Yeah,
it's great. It's one thing to beat Minnesota, to Minnesota, and knocking off Buffalo. He needed to win that game, but. Look, man, they won the game 49-28. So obviously everything worked. The game plan worked. The coaching was excellent. The execution of the plan was great. And most importantly, the individual performances were above and beyond. And that really, in this, you called out Plummer, goes to Justin Fields. In a game like this, everything does matter, right? You got to get breaks and, Schlavsky getting thrown out, like stuff like that happens. But your best players have to make plays. And as I, kind of talked about on the prediction pod, I thought that, whichever quarterback played the better game, you'd be talking about, well, hey, that's the team that actually won the game on Sunday. Fields outplayed Lawrence by a mile.
Yes, he did.
It was just, it was crazy how good he was. And, they bottled up Lawrence. Now, huge props to the defensive line and the whole front seven for taking away what Clemson wanted to do. And that had a, big, obviously, factor on limiting, how effective Lawrence was. Right. But at the end of the day, Fields was the difference in this game. I don't know that it can be said any other way. And the fact that he did it with bruised ribs or whatever he had is just miraculous. And when you and I talked about it a little bit yesterday, Zach, and has there ever been a better, gutsier performance in the history of Ohio State football, or at least in the modern era, that I've witnessed. I mean, yeah, maybe something's happened in the 30s, but come on, that has got to be the greatest or one of the top 2 greatest performances in Buckeye football history, in my opinion.
I tend to agree with that. Tim, how about you? What was one of your big takeaways from the performance yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, Justin Fields was the best player on the field by a long way. But that aside, the prediction pod, when you asked about matchups, I basically said I like our defensive line against their offensive line and our offensive line against their defensive line.
Yes, you did.
Those two, to me, those two matchups were the difference in the game outside of Fields. And when you look at it, it's not just the matchups. When you look at the flow of the game and how it unfolded, the offensive line just absolutely dominated in that second quarter when Ohio State needed them to dominate, right? The first quarter was a lot of back and forth, and those first couple drives, you're like, shit, it looks like Clemson's going to score at will. But the defense stepped up and was able to shut them down. But in large part, I mean, Ohio State held the ball a lot in the second quarter. Credit to the offensive line for doing that, and Sermon and the game planning and everything else. But then you kind of flip to the second half of the game, and that's when the defensive line really stepped up and just gave Lawrence all kinds of issues. And they couldn't stop Cooper. They couldn't stop Garrett. Those guys were in the backfield on every play, and Clemson's beginning to press because they're down. Yeah. And those guys dominated. Yeah. And so it wasn't just the game-long matchups, but it was when they dominated and how that impacted the game that I felt like was really important, because we needed the defensive line in the fourth quarter to shut them down. And we needed the offensive line in the second quarter to establish the lead. So to me, I think that was a big difference in the game.
Yeah. And you know what's even more remarkable about that is both units were shorthanded, right? We were down 2 pretty important rotational players at defensive end in Tyler Friday and Zach Harrison on the defensive line. And then we're down our starting left guard. Harry Miller goes out, and then Matthew Jones goes down. And how I laughed out loud, because then they roll Paris Johnson Jr. out there, like, okay, well, here's Paris Johnson Jr., the number 1 tackle in the country, filling in. By the way, he can also play guard. I mean, if you're Clemson, you're like, oh my God. Like these dudes, these goons, they just keep bringing them off the sideline into the game. And it didn't matter. I mean, like, whoever played dominated. Just to your point, it was a really, really impressive performance. I agree with you, Tim.
They brought out Johnson, and it was time for breakfast. It was pancake time.
Did you? And he had that.
Oh, dude, that was so amazing.
He had one of those like Blind Side moments. You guys see the movie The Blind Side? There's a scene in that movie where Michael Orr, the player that's featured in that story, basically blocks a defender across the field out of bounds and like into the stands. Paris Johnson had a moment like that on Friday, which was pretty remarkable. I got a couple of takeaways. I mean, going into this game, the conventional thinking was Alabama and Clemson were in a class by themselves, with Ohio State at the top of the next level just beneath them, which also included probably Georgia, Oklahoma, maybe Notre Dame. But Ohio State was at the top of that echelon, but still not quite at Alabama and Clemson's level. I think with that performance on Friday, Ohio State is now squarely in that upper echelon with Bama and Clemson. There is no doubt in my mind, even regardless of the outcome of the national championship game, I think Ohio State belongs in that conversation now for sure. And I mentioned this to you guys over text, but I don't think in my 40 years as a rabid college football fan have I seen something backfire worse on a head coach than Dabo Swinney voting Ohio State 11th on his ballot for the Coaches Bowl after championship Saturday. It was a gigantic miscalculation that he continued to double down on every time he was asked about it, and that he would gift that level of bulletin board material to an Ohio State program that has been lethal since like 2012 as an underdog is either the height of arrogance or stupidity or self-unawareness. I don't know what, but it blew up in Sweeney's face so badly that even people who had no connection to Ohio State football whatsoever have been pointing and laughing at him for the last 36 hours. And it was a huge cherry on top of that win for me, that it was almost worth going through the pain of that heartbreaking loss in the Fiesta Bowl last year to arrive at this point. So thank you, Dabo Swinney, for that. And finally, before the game, I saw an interview with James Laurinaitis on the Colin Cowherd show. And Laurinaitis was very concerned about the lack of game reps that Ohio State had going into this game, and he felt like that was going to be a huge factor. He wasn't the only one saying that. And my contention was, and I mentioned this to you guys over text, look, the guys that are going to be deciding the outcome in this game are juniors, seniors, in some cases, fifth-year seniors, sixth-year seniors, logged a lot of snaps. They played in a lot of big games. I didn't think it would be an issue. and it certainly wasn't an issue. Ohio State took care of business despite that. Why don't we dive in to what Ohio State did on each side of the ball? Now, most of the fireworks for the Buckeyes were, of course, on offense. So I'd like to dive into what each of you saw from the Buckeyes on that side of the ball. Matt, I want to kick this back to you. What did you see from the offense against Clemson that stood out to you?
Well, I'll be charitable and allow the tight end conversation to let Paige take that, because he did talk about that, and he likes tight ends in more ways than one. But what I really liked, what I liked from Fields is, and what I saw in the offense is that he was hitting open receivers for not all the time, but for the big gains, for the one for Olave. Mm-hmm. I mean, the passes that he threw in the end zone that one to Rucker was just like phenomenal. Oh. It was just like
laser.
But it's like Rucker has amazing hands too. He just basically yanked it in, and that was fantastic. I just saw a lot better, what would I call, more calculated risks that paid off for us. Right. And using our resources, especially on our wide receiver, how deep the depth of it. Yes, there's Olave and Wilson, but Williams, my triple is still Jamison Williams was just, he's open a lot. And I think that he's easily the fastest guy on the team. So I think that they used that to their advantage, and he looked for someone other than Olave or other than Wilson. And I think it really made us a different team offensively.
Yeah. 7 different receivers for Ohio State caught passes, to your point. Tim, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say 2 quick things. Look, everything worked seemingly on offense, from play calling to execution to every position group, really did their job well. I think one thing I saw Justin Fields do differently, following on from Matt's point about not only about spreading it around, but he hit Sermon at least a couple times, just right out of the backfield, and he had gone through progressions. Nobody was open, and rather than force a throw, he just dumped it out to Sermon, and Sermon ended up getting 10 or 15 yards out of it.
Yeah.
That was something that we've been wanting to see out of Justin Fields, is don't try and be a hero, just take what you can get. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was a huge improvement in this game and paid dividends. So hopefully, we continue to see that out of him when we play Alabama, because I think they're going to need it. I think he's going to need to be patient.
Yeah.
And then, look, just given everything worked on offense, I got to give a plug to my boy, Mayan Williams. How good was that run?
Oh,
That's what we have to look forward to. I can't wait until he's seeing the field.
Yeah.
That guy's a badass.
Yeah, he did. He had a really nice run. I can't remember how long that went for. Let's see, Williams. Yeah, a 15-yard run. They gave Sermon a little bit of a rest there for a couple plays, and the run you're referring to, Tim, went for about 15 yards, and boy, he finished off. I think it was their stud safety, Nolan Turner. You're right. Yeah, he punished Nolan Turner at the end of that run. Yeah, I love that. Chad, how about you? What did you see from the offense that stood out?
Chris Olave is one of the best route runners Ohio State has had.
Yes, he is.
I mean, the guy's just he really is. I mean, like, Justin overthrew him in that first quarter when he completely blew by that receiver. But I was just sitting there watching some highlights, and like, he put a move on that one Clemson defensive back. Like, he didn't even know where he was. The one that was caught right there at the side of the end zone. That guy was like, had no clue where he was. And to Tim's point, Sermon, he had 4 catches for 61 yards.
Yeah.
That's huge, man. That is huge. And I tell you what, another young player, that Smith, Njigba, he had a good game too.
Yeah.
Do you see some of those blocks he had on there?
Yeah, he blocked
one.
Well.
I was a little worried he was going to get a penalty on him because he took the guy completely out of bounds, just running smack, which I love. But you can't say any more about the tight ends, the offensive line. I mean, those guys are just studs. And Fields was just. That one toss that was 60 yards in the air.
Yeah.
To Olave.
Yeah, I think they said it was 61 yards in the air, the long ball to Olave. I think it was over 60, which was a rainbow.
Craziness.
Yeah.
I was just going to say something about Fowler, because, Fowler's kind of a homer. He really never gives Ohio State, but he, to what you said earlier, Zach, about one of the best performances we've ever seen, this and that. Fowler actually gave us kudos and said something along the lines of that exact same thing. Probably one of the gutsiest, best performances I've seen covering college football in 30 years.
Yeah.
I was kind of shocked by that.
Paige, what did you see from the offense that stood out?
There's something about Olave that's just a calming force for that offense and for Fields specifically. When you need to play, you just feel like that guy's there. He's gonna get it done for you. And I don't know. It's just, thinking back to the Northwestern game, him not being in, I just would have never thought a wide receiver could have the impact on a game that Olave's had. But man, it really came through against Clemson. And then, the other thing that I was thinking about is, going back to the coaching and the execution and the game plan and the fact that Ohio State only played 6 games, but even you could make the argument 2 of those games, right? I mean, they were a shell of what the team could be.
Right.
And I just wonder if Day and Wilson just played turtle for those first 6 games and just ran the most vanilla offense that they could possibly run, right? They knew about Ruckert. I mean, come on, spreading the ball around Farrell. I mean, they know those guys are weapons, but they just kept it in their back pocket specifically for the playoffs, specifically for Clemson, and then just unleashed fury at these guys. And, it was coming at them from so many different directions, and Clemson clearly had no answers. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it's just one of the things that I was thinking about because, it's like, well, why aren't they doing that? Or why aren't they doing this? It's like, well, guess what? We're playing, Illinois or whomever, and it's not that important. So we're not going to show all our cards. And I wonder if that was part of the game plan from a big picture perspective from Day and Wilson the entire time.
That seems reasonable to me. I mean, the play that comes to mind to back up your point was that nifty throwback pass to Ruckert on that first touchdown. And we hadn't seen that all year long. Little wrinkles like that they did. Maybe they set that up by putting something else on film. And that play was wide open. When they ran it.
Play.
Yeah, that was a great play. No, I totally agree with you. I saw a much better plan from Ryan Day for Fields in the passing game in this one. Tim, you mentioned the check down throws to Sermon that were there and that were also very productive. Now, Sermon had a big catch on Ohio State's first touchdown drive, right? The big check down that went for 34 yards. Paige, I wanted to echo your point about what a calming influence Olave is on that offense. It was Olave who got Ohio State's first down in the game, if you remember, on their second possession. And I remember taking a deep exhale at that point. I was like, okay, here we go. Olave's back. And that really seemed to get the Ohio State offense in a rhythm. You guys have already mentioned the tight ends involved in the passing game, but the first time was another wrinkle that was added to this plan by Day. I give him a ton of credit for that. Farrell and Ruckert accounted for 3 touchdowns. Ruckert especially just killed Clemson. I also like the way Day mixed up his tempos. Thought he did that beautifully. And there was much better balance between the run and the pass in this game. It really all came together. 49 points, 639 yards of offense against a Clemson defense that came into this game 6th in the country in total defense and 5th in defensive yards per play. So huge kudos to Ryan Day. I think the criticism that we all had of Day was fair. But Chad, I'm with you, man. After this performance, Day really demonstrated that he is one of the best coaches in the game today. One other observation. Clemson has some dudes on the defensive line, some guys that are clearly going to be playing on Sundays, right? Like that Brian Brzee, that defensive tackle. I thought he looked very impressive. They have some other guys on that line that clearly look like NFL players. But after Skalski got ejected, man, I didn't really think they looked impressive at all at linebacker or in the secondary. I mean, I remember being way more impressed by their athletes in the back 7 last year. And I mean, they don't have anybody like an Isaiah Simmons in that back 7. And then Ohio State skill guys, the way they looked in comparison to them, and we got NFL players. Some of those Clemson linebackers and defensive backs, I mean, do they look like they should be playing at like Wisconsin or Northwestern?
To your point, Z, like even before he got hurt or ejected, I mean, they were lost, man. And like, I know Gallagher, you made a big point of that. Remember when we called the timeout right at the beginning? When like we're like, what the hell are you doing? Like you snap the ball. Those guys don't know what the hell they're doing.
They're confused.
You remember that, Tim? Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So they looked lost, man.
They looked lost, and they also, to me, looked like physically, athletically, they couldn't keep up. I think there's no better evidence of that than all 3 starting wide receivers had a pass reception of 45 yards or longer. Olave had a 56-yarder. Jamison Williams had a 45-yarder. Both those went for touchdowns. Garrett Wilson had a 47-yarder that set up another touchdown. Olave, as you mentioned, CP was wide open on another long throw that Fields barely overthrew. I mean, we were running behind their secondary all day long. And then when we got throws underneath to tight ends and running backs, I mean, we were punishing their linebackers and defensive backs, at the second level. So I was very impressed by that.
Clemson didn't seem, there was one point, and I should have gone back and looked. There was maybe mid to late third quarter, fourth quarter. Lawrence was on the sideline. They had no emotion. They weren't. Lawrence just was kind of standing by Sweeney and was just kind of talking to him. And I remember saying to Juan, I'm like, look at these guys. I mean, they're getting their ass kicked, but they're not, running up and, going Tom Brady up and down the sideline, screaming at each other, getting in each other's faces. They were defeated at that point. And, it was striking to me, the lack of emotion that they had on the sidelines. And maybe it's just because they felt like, holy shit, we cannot run with these guys.
Yeah, they were shell shocked for sure.
There's a word for that, Paige. It's called hubris. And when you're so fucking arrogant because you think you're going to kick the other team's ass and then you get your ass kicked, that's what that look is that you saw on their face.
Making a prediction of your team going to lose to said team because you yourself have hubris. And then you take that same little ball of hubris and you go parlay with Notre Dame. And then you walk around with a hat on that looks like a sock and everything. And then you start drinking Heinekens at 2 p.m. and you think the world is beautiful. And it is indeed beautiful, but not for the reasons you thought it would be. That's hubris.
I think hubris is the wrong adjective for that. It's truthfulness, but I don't know if you
truthiness.
I don't know if it's hubris. It might be stupidity. But all those things are true. Hey, man, I took a swing. What can I say? I was wrong.
Wow. Like any good.
Well, I want you to wear that hat again Monday night.
Yeah, by the way,
I want you to predict against the Buckeyes again, because that seems to be a formula that works.
All right. Okay. Well, Paige will continue to take some guff here as we go along. Guys, why don't we move along to the Ohio State defense? Because I want to get from each of you your impressions on what you saw from the Ohio State defense, which was a pretty impressive performance. Tim, let's start with you.
So for me, a couple things. One is in particular on the defensive line, I felt like Cooper may have played the best game he ever played as a Buckeye.
Oh, yeah.
There were several plays late in the game during critical situations where Clemson scores, like, yeah, we had a lead, but like if they were to get a quick score, it would have become uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. He was literally unblockable. I think Herbstreit was talking about how Cooper is not like a fast twitch guy, but like he got around the offensive lineman and to Lawrence in such a way that was he was a different player.
Yeah.
And I felt like that's something I hadn't seen out of him before. Hilliard, just guys turned into a hero. I mean, it's so great to see from both of those guys as like 6-year players. Yeah. I think you said it, Zach. He's become our best linebacker. To me, I think there's no question about that this year. The guy's just been absolutely a stud all year. And then, in the back end, I have to say I was hard on Wade because I felt like he was getting picked on. I felt like Clemson saw something, but then, really kind of looking at the box scores. I mean, he gave up some yards, but on the other hand, he had the most tackles on the defense. He had 7 solo tackles. So and he gave up no big plays. Right. So, while at the time I was pretty frustrated with Wade because I thought he could play better, and in looking at it, I think he probably played better than I'd originally given him credit for.
I mean, that's coaching 101, right? You take away what the other team wants to do. Mm-hmm. And clearly the game plan, at least my opinion, the game plan was, hey, we are not going to let Lawrence and Etienne kill us. Right. And then, by the way, Wade, Proctor, Banks do not get beat deep, right? And I will live with 12-yard completions all day long. They're going to have to make 5 or 6 of them on a given drive to go ahead and, go down the field and beat us. And I think that was definitely the plan. So, yeah, I'm with you, Gallagher. Like, we were all screaming at the, TV, Wade, what are you doing? And then you go back and you look at it and say, I'll bet you $100 that was the game plan the entire time. Just don't get beat deep. Yeah. Make these guys go the length of the field. And we're not going to let Lawrence and Etienne beat us. And the other thing is, you could tell from those very few first series that Clemson was very concerned about our defensive line. Lawrence had the ball out of his hands within 2 seconds. Yeah. Right. I mean, he was just dumping it. It was just crisp. They were exploiting, the perimeter, but they knew that if he just stood back there for 3 or 4 seconds, we were going to get to him. And then eventually, they fell behind and they couldn't control that. So that's what had to happen. But it was obvious that the game plan was get the ball out of Lawrence's hands quickly. And I think that, it was kind of painful to watch, Wade and some of those guys give up those underneath throws, but that was probably part of the game plan the entire time. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that was totally part of the game plan. They kept talking about how Wade was bailing. He would be over his man in what looked like would be press coverage, but at the snap, he was bailing every time. So they were really, they were satisfied with giving up some of that stuff underneath. Cornell Powell was their leading receiver with 139 yards and 2 touchdowns. But you look at the box score, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. He did have kind of a nice game. But I mean, were those yards that impactful? To me, it was kind of like in a basketball game, you're getting blown out, but you score 30 points. It was like, oh great, well you scored 30 points, but you lost by 20. That's kind of what I felt like Clemson got out of the passing game. It was just, they were just yards. They weren't super impactful, and they didn't really keep Clemson in the game. Matt, how about you?
I'll say really quickly, I think they mirrored the offense. They did a more kumbaya, like everyone not relying on one person to play outstanding, but everyone to play solid. Everyone to, when they had their moment to deliver, they delivered. And I think that's when you have a bunch of 5 stars and have a talent-rich team, that works best. You don't have to rely on one person. And I think what we saw is like the thing that we talk about all the time is just like, let's use the talent that we have and just keep teams on their heels. And I think that worked really well defensively as well. I'm like, the linebackers, everyone played a really solid game, and people stood up when they had to stand up. And like Tim, I was hard on Wade as well, but yeah, he had a lot of tackles, and you guys may be right. It was a bend, don't break plan. And that worked beautifully.
There's one play that stood out to me. And Chad, I'm going to kick it to you here in a moment. I just want to mention this one play that I thought really kind of illustrated this great team approach that they took to playing defense. And it was Josh Proctor. Tim, you had pointed this out in the moment over text. Proctor, I think at this point, Clemson was up 7-0, and they had the ball again. Ohio State went 3 and out. They had the ball again. I think it was 3rd down, if I'm not mistaken. And there was a tight end wide open down the seam that could have gone for a touchdown. And he was wide open because Proctor bid on an underneath route and left his deep safety spot. But on that same play, Pete Warner blitzed and got right in Lawrence's face to force a bad throw. And that bailed out Proctor. But I mean, if there's team defense in football, that play would illustrate that, right? One guy got beat, but he had a teammate right there, who had his back and forced a bad throw, and Clemson wasn't able to take advantage of the mistake. So I thought that was really cool to see. And we hadn't seen a lot of that prior to yesterday. Chad, I want to kick this to you. What did you see from the Ohio State defense that stood out?
It was just so nice seeing him play as a unit, man. I tell you what. And one of the funniest things I saw, and I sent that to you guys yesterday. I don't know if you actually looked at it, and you may have already sent it out to you. Is it was a handoff from Tracy Lawrence to Etienne, and after Browning just put him right, hit Lawrence, put him right on his ass. Yeah. And Lawrence was sitting there on the ground, raising his arms, hey, what the fuck is that? It was so great.
Yeah.
Took him right off his feet.
They were very physical.
It was just yeah.
Look, I think I owe the Ohio State linebackers an apology. I've been doubting them since last season. You guys know that. I've been very, opinionated about those players. And I'd been concerned for months that they just didn't have what it would take to shut down running threats as good as Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence. And on Friday night, they completely stonewalled the Clemson running game. 44 yards on 22 attempts. Lawrence, who ran for 107 yards on 16 carries in the Fiesta Bowl last year, he was the difference in the game. His running was the difference in that game, was held to -8 yards rushing on 10 carries on Friday night. Etienne held to 10 carries for 32 yards. So very impressive. And a lot of that is due to the play of the linebackers. Tim, I'm going to echo what you just said. I continue to be amazed by Justin Hilliard, who's had to wait 6 years and battle through so many frustrating injuries to get to this point. Now, I agree with you. He is Ohio State's best linebacker, and he's here with a chance to win a national championship. And I also think with the way this dude has played this season, he made himself a little bit of money. You know, he's going to get drafted, and I think he's going to make an NFL roster, and I think he stands to make some nice money playing professionally. So kudos to the Ohio State linebackers and to Justin Hilliard in particular. I'm not sure how Tough Borland won the defensive MVP. Like he did. I think he was very good. The defense, he was part of a really, really good defensive front seven. But how the hell did he win the defensive MVP? Because I could list off like 3 or 4 players that should have gotten that over him. But I guess let him have it. He's taken a lot of shit, especially from me, and Ohio State fans all over the place. So kudos to Borland for winning the MVP there. Why don't we take a few minutes and have a peek at Ohio State's matchup in the national championship game with number 1 Alabama. I just want to get how each of you is feeling right now without really having dug into the matchup, how you're feeling right now about it. Chad, let me go back to you. How do you feel about Ohio State's chances in that game against Bama?
I'm very confident that we can play with Alabama. Yes, their offense is a good, Smith is in the league of his own. I mean, he's just an all-around baller. Najee Harris is great, but their defense, Mac Jones, he's a good quarterback, but their defense doesn't impress me whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So as long as we can get, like we were talking about tonight, we were checking in the game, we get a stop here, there, and we keep scoring, I have no problem with us beating Alabama by 10.
Wow. By 10. Okay. Matt, give me your thoughts on this matchup.
I think it's, Chad makes some really strong points in terms of, their defense is their liability. But, we just had a really good defensive game. So we need to have as good of a game, if not better, against their offense, because their offense is better as a whole team, better than Clemson, in my view.
Yeah,
so our defense, it's really going to be incumbent on, a same kumbaya, everyone is a unit playing together, because that's the type of thing that's going to win. And I think we could look at a same kind of game that we saw against Clemson, but I think that Saban's been in positions like this before, and there's a little bit more, he's going to come with a very solid plan. But I'm like Chad, I'm very encouraged. But again, we can't rest on our laurels, and this has to be something where we have to bring this as diligent of a game plan and approach and getting them ready as we did against Clemson.
I should have mentioned that Ohio State, the early line is Bama -7.5. I believe that's the exact same line that the Sugar Bowl was. I think Clemson was a 7.5 point favorite in that game as well. Tim, give us your thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, not a lot different. I agree with Matt and Chad. Best team we've played all year, best coach team we've played all year. And it's going to have to be their best game. Ohio State just played their best game. They're going to have to play a better game in order to win, which is asking a lot. And so, I totally agree. I think that Alabama's defense is definitely gettable. I think Fields and team will score points. And I ultimately think it's going to come down to, can our defense really make the stops against Alabama when we need to? I think it's going to be a tall order, but if they play the way that they're capable of, it can happen.
All right. Yeah, Paige, when you and I talked about this matchup yesterday on the phone, we were talking about Kerry Combs thinking, okay, how do I get 3 stops here? Right? 3 stops. Is that the magic number? What's the magic number here in terms of stops that the Ohio State defense has to come up with that'll be enough for the Ohio State offense then to counter with points? Give me your thoughts on this matchup. What do you think, Paige?
Well, I mean, if it's 3, so what? I mean, typically you get how many 10 possessions in a game?
Sounds about right.
So if they score 7 touchdowns, I don't think we can win. It's going to have to be more than 3. And I agree with everything that everyone said, except Tim said they're going to have to play a better game. I don't know. I think if Ohio State plays as well or up to the level they played against Clemson, they'll beat Alabama. Can they take it to a next level? I certainly hope so. The competition is definitely going up. I think, Clemson is a great team, but they don't quite have the dynamic playmakers that they did last year and the kind of playmakers that Alabama has. Mm-hmm. I would say it right now. Let's just give Smith the 3 touchdowns because he's going to get them, right? I mean, I don't know how you're going to stop that, but okay, so we'll give you that. We're going to take away something else. Harris, getting pressure on Mac Jones is probably going to be key. So again, to like Gallagher's point, our defensive line against their offensive line, and Zach, you've said their offensive line is much better. I'll take your word for it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they are. But if we can get to Jones, I think we have a hell of a chance of winning this game. I think Ohio State will win this game. The other thing I would say is, and I mentioned it when we were talking yesterday, what a gift it is for Alabama to just waltz through Notre Dame, and you look at that Ohio State Clemson game. Dudes were just limping off that field left and right. Yeah. I mean, it is such a difference, from a physical perspective and the pounding those guys took. Justin Fields, for instance.
Wyatt Davis also went down.
Wyatt Davis, and Alabama didn't have to do that. That is definitely, in my opinion, a decided advantage for them. But, we have 10 days to rest up and recover. I think it's going to be a hell of a game.
My initial thoughts on this are, Alabama has that dynamic playmaker on the outside that Clemson didn't. Paige, you pointed that out. And I think Devontae Smith's probably going to win the Heisman. I think this Ohio State defense is schematically and personnel-wise designed to stop the run. And I think it can stop, if not stop, contain Najee Harris. So I think they're capable of doing that. Mac Jones isn't the athlete at quarterback that Trevor Lawrence is. You have to obviously respect what he can do as a passer. He's as good as anybody in the country throwing the ball, but I don't think they're going to have to worry about him as a runner. So that's one less concern. Maybe they can devote resources elsewhere, knowing that they don't have to worry so much about Jones as a runner. Now, he is protected by a much better offensive line than Trevor Lawrence was. The Bama offensive line is one of 3 finalists for the Joe Moore Award, which goes to the best offensive line in the country. So it'll be a little bit more of a challenge for that Ohio State front 7 facing that offensive line. But I tend to agree with you. Maybe you just live with Devontae Smith getting his and focus your energies on not letting Najee Harris being that other guy that kills you. Because if both those dudes are going, then you got a problem. And then on the other side of the ball, I'm sorry, I don't see anything from the Bama defense that makes me think that they're going to be able to slow down Ohio State. And they're 31st in the country in total defense. This is not one of Nick Saban's better defenses. In fact, I'd say it could be one of his worst, at least statistically. We're talking about a Bama defense that gave up 46 to Florida in the SEC title game. They gave up 48 earlier in the year to Ole Miss. I expect that Justin Fields and Ohio State offense are going to be able to move the ball and score plenty of points. They can win a shootout, in my opinion, in this game. So I feel very good about Ohio State chances in this one. I really do.
Why do you think the line's 7? Like, if you watch those 2 semifinal games, do you really think Alabama's 7? I mean, obviously they do, but I didn't see that. I mean, I would think 4. It just seems
I agree.
High to me. I wonder if it gets
way
bet
high.
down.
It's way high, and I think you make a good point. Does it get bet down? Is it just because it's Nick Saban and it's Alabama and because they've lived in this game practically for the last 10 years? Maybe it's that. But if you look at the 24/7 team talent composite, Alabama is just ahead of Ohio State. I think Georgia's number 1, Bama's number 2, and then right behind them is Ohio State at number 3. I sent you guys the link to the team talent composites. And if you look at the overall score, it's just a few percentage points. Like, they're very, very close in talent. So there's no real talent edge that Bama has over Ohio State in this one. I think Ohio State has the better quarterback. Sorry. I mean, all due respect, I know Mac Jones has had the better overall season start to finish, but Justin Fields is the better quarterback. Sorry. They've got Bama's got probably the most dynamic playmaker after Fields in Devontae Smith, but I like this matchup. I like it a lot. And I think the Ohio State defense will be able to come up with more stops on the Alabama offense than the Alabama defense will of the Ohio State offense. At least that's my initial impression. Paige, you do make a good point, though, about the physical beating Ohio State took in that game with Clemson, namely the injury to Fields. How big of a factor will that be in this game? And maybe, Wyatt Davis and probably some other guys are pretty beat up. Will we get more guys back off the COVID list as well? Could we see Zach Harrison back for this game? Hopefully that should help. But I think you make a good point. The other thing, did you guys happen to watch the semifinal though between Bama and Notre Dame? I personally kind of felt like if Notre Dame had just competent quarterback play and a decent passing offense, I feel like they could have made that a game. I did not think Alabama really overwhelmed them in the way most of us expect. I don't know. Chad, what did you think? Were you impressed by that performance? What did you think?
I mean, I certainly think Notre Dame had some chances, to make that a closer game. But you know what? Hey, you know how I feel about Notre Dame. I mean, since the BCS era, they're 0-7 and outscored by 161 points. It's time to put them to bed. They're all of it. They're just no more.
Okay.
I'll say. But can I say one other thing?
Sure. Go ahead.
That we are playing in the national fucking championship, boys. How fucking great is that?
It's awesome. Very exciting. Very exciting. Tim, you were going to make a point. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say I had that exact thought, Zach. It was 21-7 in the third quarter, and Notre Dame had the ball. If they could just do anything, it would have been 21-14, and you'd have had a ball game in the third quarter. But they couldn't do anything. So I think I had that exact thought, which is if this Notre Dame team, which is I don't think anywhere near Ohio State, can be in that ball game in the third quarter, I like Ohio State's chances.
I mean, I'm looking at what Notre Dame did defensively to kind of hold out. Now, Alabama finished with 437 yards of total offense. It's okay. I mean, not overwhelming. And Najee Harris, he had an early run of 53 yards early in that game. But after that, Notre Dame held him in check. He finished with 125 yards rushing on 15 carries. I think after that 53-yard run, Notre Dame held him to about 5 yards a carry. It's okay. I mean, he didn't overwhelm the Notre Dame defense. And I think Ohio State I think they can do that. I think they can replicate what Notre Dame did. Paige, did you have any thoughts on that game? What did you see? Anything stand out to you that you think might translate to Ohio State?
Well, it's just funny, the broadcasters, they kept talking about, Notre Dame has 4 outstanding tight ends and, they lost one of their tight ends. I've said this before. If your most dynamic player on offense is a tight end, you've got problems.
You got problems, yeah.
And you definitely have problems against Alabama. And, piggybacking on what you guys said, they have no dynamic playmakers at all. I mean, Book's a good quarterback. He's a crafty quarterback, but you're not beating Alabama with that. And so, yeah, I mean, and they did kind of hang around. I don't know. I watched the first quarter and then I was, just kind of keeping track on it as we went along. And I kind of felt like Alabama just sort of, seemed disinterested after, mid second quarter, like these guys can't beat us. And so they took their foot off the pedal. That won't happen against us. Mm-hmm. But that being said, they're going to see a totally different show from Ohio State and our offensive skill players than they did against Notre Dame. And, I love your point too. Like Mac Jones is a good quarterback, but, you do have Smith. Those guys are running wide open. And I'll take Justin Fields against Mac Jones every day of the week, twice on Sunday.
Yeah.
As long as Fields is healthy, I love that matchup. And we're going to go toe to toe with those guys. Absolutely.
I'm totally expecting that. Matt, how about you? Did you glean anything from that Bama Notre Dame game at all?
You mean that Alabama scrimmage? No, I watched Cobra Kai with my daughters. That was a more useful use of my time.
Well, guys, is there anything else that anybody would like to share, either from the performance against Clemson or the matchup coming up with Alabama? All right, then. Listen, great effort for a Sunday. Thanks so much for putting in the time, guys. Let's plan to reconvene later this coming week to have a peek at the national championship game. You've been listening to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and visit our website at southstandsosu.com.